Fast forwarding ahead to the year 1749, famous American scientist, printer, inventor, wine drinker, and beer lover politician combined a bunch of Leyden jars to produce a greater charge. These Leyden jars are essentially early capacitors, fairly simple, a jar with some metal on the inside, some metal on the outside, an electrolyte, and a conductor connecting the two. When he combined these Leyden jars together to produce a greater charge, he used the military term battery to describe a group. This is where the term battery comes from. Franklin is probably best known for, quote, discovering electricity when he flew a kite in a thunderstorm that lit up a key that was hanging from a silk string. This is what, in America, we learned as children about the discovery of electricity. It's not quite true. He probably did fly a kite from a shelter that picked up a charge from the sky and may or may not have charged a Leyden jar. This experiment was a success in that he was trying to prove the concept of the lightning rod, a device that would draw lightning to the rod instead of blasting a building to pieces, which was a common problem back then. A problem today in some ways. Today, most structures have Franklin's lightning rods installed and grounded to protect the buildings. Fast forward to 1780, while dissecting a frog attached to a brass hook with an iron scalpel, Luigi Galvani notices the legs of the frog twitch. He wrongly calls this animal electricity. His friend Alessandro Volta believes that it has something to do with the different types of metal that he's using. This leads to the development of what's known as a galvanic cell. The galvanic cell is an electrochemical cell in which an electric current is generated from spontaneous reactions. The most common apparatus generally consists of two different metals, each immersed in separate beakers containing their respective metal ions in solution, connected by a salt bridge, or separated by a porous membrane. So Volta decides to take this a little bit further and starts to monkey around with galvanic cells. In 1800, after experimenting with different types of metals and liquids, Volta produces the first battery, which would later become known as the Voltaic Pile, a stack of alternating layers of zinc, blotting paper soaked in salt water, and silver to create a charge. This wet cell battery creates electricity because of the redox reaction between the silver and zinc metals allows electrons to flow, with each cell providing about 0.6 volts of electric potential. And this was a big deal. It was exciting. Volta presented his results to the Emperor Napoleon, seen here, being amazed. These Voltaic piles are fairly simple, and you can make them yourself with some pennies, zinc washers, and some wet salty paper, like a coffee filter. You can find pennies anywhere these days because they're no longer used as currency in Canada. Your issue, if you want to try this, might be, where can you find zinc at home? The answer may surprise you, if you have sandpaper. Moving ahead a few more decades, Mary Shelley was unlikely to have conceived her novel Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus, in 1817 without the work of the Italian scientist Galvani. Looking back at the creation of the book, she remembered conversations with Lord Byron and her husband, the poet Percy Shelley, about Galvani's ideas. Now, these would have been well-traveled, vaguely wealthy guys back then, who would have had the chance to talk to other well-educated, wealthy people in Europe. The idea that perhaps a corpse could be reanimated, she wrote. Galvanism has given tokens of such things. Galvani's breakthrough had come in September 1786 when he accidentally discovered the spinal cords of a frog carried an electric charge. Galvani believed he had found proof of what he called animal electricity, an innate force in the body's nerves, comparing the frog's muscle fibers to a Leyden jar, an electrical component which stores high voltage charge between electrical conductors. It's possible that Mary was more strongly influenced by Galvani's nephew, Giovanni Aldini, who took up his uncle's work after he died in 1798. He defended his reputation and publicized the concept of galvanism. So it was Aldini, with great fanfare and showmanship, like David Copperfield or David Blaine or David the Magnificent, tried to use galvanism to resurrect a newly hanged man. This was part of the Murder Act of England, where you could only take apart bodies of people that had committed murder. So there were lots of people drowning in the new canals that were being built everywhere in England at the time. And Galvani tried to address this drowning issue by thinking maybe we can bring these drowning victims back to life. Galvani himself tried the process on an amputated arm and foot, but he seemed to be much more modest, saying, "Let there be a limit to conjectures. Like, let's not go crazy with this idea. He writes this at the close of the treatise announcing his discovery of the Galvanic Cell. His call was ignored and things got weird. So Aldini took a man who was executed and left out in the cold for a few hours, brought him into the lab in front of a bunch of people, and started poking him with electric conductors. Didn't bring him back to life, but they did get him to flinch and wiggle.
Feast. The ghouls all came from their humble abodes to catch a jolt from my electrode.
Attaching wires to other parts of bodies, he got a change in expressions and other really weird things. So this ultimately led to the idea behind Dr. Frankenstein bringing the monster back to life, who was a criminal in the novel, as you'll recall.